Hey, this is Sam. So today we're going to be looking at Power BI and how to take the Canada Council for the Arts data and chop through it like it's nothing but a delicious cake. All right, so first thing you need to do is install Power BI Desktop. It is free. You can get it from the Microsoft Store. It's really only not free when you want to share the report online as a dynamic report and host it on a database. Now, what we're going to be doing is simply pointing at a Excel file or a CSV file, and so it's free. We can use it and we won't share it unless we're actually sending out the file with the data in it. All right, so you've downloaded Power BI and you're going to go into the Canada Council's data tables. And I believe you're going to download the big file here, Open Data CSV. So CSV stands for comma separated values. And if you try to just open it raw, you'll notice it's not very friendly. It's, well, actually, if we really open it raw, not in Excel, it'll show us what's really going on, which is values that are separated with commas. So this is what it looks like. Ooh, terrifying. And Excel and Power BI, says, hey, there's a comma. This must be a new value, a new column in here. So if we click here, just double click at the top, there we go. This is a little bit more readable, but we're just going to take this as raw data and bring it into Power BI. So in Power BI, this is what it looks like when you open it fresh. There's nothing you need to connect to data. Okay, so it's looking at the data, it's identified the headers, and basically this seems okay. We're not seeing any undesired splitting, and we're actually going to go in and look at the data and start transforming it. I already know what's wrong with this data. And so this is really, at this point, it's kind of the digestion of the data part. It's very important and it's kind of the hardest thing. What we're in right now is what you would normally get if you press the transform data button. It's also known as Power Query. So Power Query is where you do all these transformations and rename your things, do some extra columns, clean up the data, see all the anomalies, and then you can do the easy drag and drop part of the process. All right, now let's make sure our analysis views are turned on. And then also right now, this is only analyzing the top 1,000 rows. So we're going to say analyze the entire data set. It's not that many rows. We've got about 50K rows. We're not talking about millions or billions here. So what does this mean, right? If we look at this column, we see all the different datas. We see there's only 6 distinct data, and same thing here. Now, there's a lot of redundancy in this data, right? We're seeing the same column. It's pretty much the same thing. This one says 2018-18. This one says 2017-2018. So, first off, there's a French and the English. So we're going to remove a lot of this duplicate data. So I prefer it this way. So I'm going to get rid of that. Alias, pseudonym. We're going to do a new column that merges both of these. Okay, so let's do a new column. I actually just asked ChatGPT in this case. So I need a little bit of a formula. So I'm going to add a new column, add a new custom column. And what I want is well, let's go look at a pseudonym in here if we can find one. I don't really want to filter because it's going to make it permanent. But basically, I want to say, hey, if there's no pseudonym, don't worry about it. If there is a pseudonym, give me the name dash the pseudonym. And if not, just give me the name with no dash, right? So I'm going to do the new custom column, and I'm going to put the name that ChatGPT gave me for the formula. And I'm going to call it ID, name, and pseudonym. So instead of looking at name and pseudonym, I can look at everything in a single column. And here we see it. If there's no pseudonym, there's no dash. If there is a pseudonym, it's going to come in with a name. We'll be able to see that later. So this new column is at the end here. Okay, so let us get rid of anything not useful. Actually, now we've created this new column, we can get rid of pseudonym. These two columns, same data, one's in English, one's in French. We're going to get rid of the French one. It's useless. Same thing here, recommended amount, montant recommandé. This is going to be the exact same data. Goodbye. Guess what? This always says CAD. There's one data in here. It is redundant. It is useless. It is implied. Goodbye. Approval date, that is fine. Once again, we get duplicate data, so we're going to delete the French one. This is duplicate data again, English and French. So they should have just wrote the name of the column in English and French instead of having two columns. That's just silly. Now, federal writing code, I don't know what that is. I can't use this data. I'm going to throw it in the garbage. So I'm just selecting the column and hitting delete, by the way. And you may notice it's kind of writing all of this as a step in my queries here. So these are all the queries, what is being done to the data anytime it's ingested. So if I refresh, the data is going to go through all of those things, removing all the same columns I'm deleting right now. Okay, same thing here. We have a duplicate English and French, so I'm going to delete it. Program code that is useless for me, delete. Same thing, same data. One's got an English header, one's got a French header, delete the French. Same thing. Same thing. Oh. Actually, this is kind of weird. It seems like it's the exact same thing, but this one has 14 distinct values and this one has 13 distinct values. So if we wanted to do a data audit, we could do that and figure out what is the value that's missing here. I'm just going to keep it simple for today. I don't know why the French got one extra value that the English don't, but it's going in the garbage. And so last modified, actually we see there's only two different values. So this is also pretty much garbage data. Data source, there's one distinct value. Source de données, I don't know why the French got two data sources, but the English got one. It seems like it's always the same or empty. So probably, yeah, here we see there's two of them where they didn't put in the right data. So anyways, this is the same. We don't care about it. It's going in the garbage, but there are some data anomalies in there. And if somebody did an audit, they would find it at the arts funding. So I recommend that the Canadian Arts Funding Association cleans up their data a little bit more. Okay, and this is our new column. So we've thrown a bunch of stuff in the garbage. Now let's do another pass at this and rename the columns much simpler, right? This is a disgusting name. And so we're going to split the column into two categories. We're going to split the columns into IDs as to who is getting this money, and we're going to split this column into funding. So let's get the names as short as possible. We're going to remove things like at time of approval and just keep the names very short and very legible. So funding period, ID name, ID recipient type, now here's the thing with recommended amount. What do you mean recommended amount? Is it how much money they got? Is it how much money they asked for? Is it how much money you recommended and they got something else? What the heck is a recommended amount, right? And then it brings up the other question, how much money did they ask for? How much money did they actually get, etc. Now, I don't really care that much about the approval date, but may as well keep it in. ID location. Actually, I should call this ID city. I'm going to make another subcategory of location. Here's a pro tip. You do not need to write Canada Council for the Arts in front of every column. It's pretty useless. And, you know, there's probably, it's a bit confusing, right? Like, what's the difference between type of funding and types of support? You'd have to kind of dig into the data, but okay, it seems like our cleanup is done. I'm going to go Home tab and close and apply. And we'll do a basic sanity check. Is going to apply all of those changes to our incoming data. Now, the beauty of this is we've created a data pipeline. So next year, when there's a new document, if it's got the same column names, we're just going to point to the new Excel file and is going to do all of this for us. Just going to name the table. And let's look at this, right? So we've got our funding type, approval date. Okay, so the approval date, I don't actually really need it. So I'm just going to say hide this. It's still there if I need to pull it away, but it seems useless. I'm just going to simplify this as much as possible. All right, let's build our first data point. So we're going to do a matrix. Press the matrix button here. And as I said in the other video, a matrix is different. It's not going to be a table. A table is not going to group things together. So a matrix is more powerful because it can do the grouping. So The other thing we can do is kind of look at our raw tables. So, this is our table and is going to have just the raw data after the transformation, right? So let's get familiar with this data outside of the data transformation system. So what we're going to care about is, okay, so we're going to care about the recipient type, then their name and pseudonym. We're probably going to care about the province and obviously the amount. And then the program and section. Those are kind of be the four things that we really care about. So let's start dragging that in. We're going to be using our name and pseudonym column instead of the name. That way, if there's a pseudonym, it's going to show up. So, okay, let's look at this, right? The values we're going to be wanting to show is the amount of funding. So we're going to drag that in. This is just total amount of funding right now. And then we're going to say, well, I need to know who the money went to. Let's also sort by recipient type. So now we've got the recipient type. And notice already, because it's a matrix, it's doing that grouping, right? And let's bring in the provinces in here, I guess. Okay, so let's do a couple things. Right away, we notice there's no 1,000 comma separator. So we're going to go in our table view and select the amount, funding amount, and just click here for the 1,000 comma separators. So that's going to help figure out the numbers. Now let's help ourselves with the numbers again. In the funding value sum here, we're going to do a conditional formatting for the background colors. And very simple, we're going to pick a light blue and a darker blue, and we click OK. And already we are starting to see some more data analysis. We're also going to sort this by the highest amount so we can see who's getting the most amount of money in here. Now, next thing we're going to do is divide this by columns by funding period. So I just dragged this in as column. We're seeing the same amount, but over time, right? And this reminds me, well, actually, there's nothing before 2017, so that's interesting. Good. The data before 2017 didn't really seem proper anyhow, so that makes sense. Okay. Now we're going to want to slice, we're going to want to filter basically this data. Sometimes we're going to want to look at organizations, individuals, or groups. Sometimes we'll want to look for the name of the artist. Sometimes we'll want to look by province. So let's make a couple of slicers. The slicer is right here, and this is what allows us to filter things. So let's start by filtering recipient type. I've got my slicer selected, and we've got a bunch of different ways of dealing with the slicers and a bunch of weird little things in Power BI. So first thing, let's look at the slicer settings. I can have this as a tile. Obviously, it's not good if there's thousands of things. I can have this as a drop down. So not very good in this case. We're probably just going to stick to vertical list because there's only 3 of them, and keep things that way. Now, slicer header, I could rename this here, and it would fix it, but let's make things a bit more official, turn that off, and go add a title instead. So what are we calling this? Recipient type. And depending on your styling, it's just going to be a bit more chunky and official to give it a style like this. Okay, so if I click on group, it's going to filter by group, etc. What's the next thing we want to filter by? Let's do a slicer for the regions. So we're going to add this here, and just drag the province here, I guess. Now, here's maybe a better contender for a tile slicer. It's still a bit chunky. It's taking a fair amount of space, but it's probably better than this vertical list, unless I put the list here, right? Then we get to see it all. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll just do that. I'll be a bit lazy about it. Okay, now here's something that's part of the slightly idiotic Power BI interface. When you click on here, see how it's only selecting one thing? And if I were to hold control, I could multi-select things. Nobody wants to hold control. We're just going to turn that off, and now I can multi-select without holding control. I can also turn on the select all option. This is going to be faster than manually checking things on and off. Notice when there's nothing selected, it doesn't filter anything. And when I do select, now it filters. And we do not want a single select. That would put it that way. And so, yeah, we don't want the multi-select with control. And in this case, we showed select all. If this was a longer list, we could also add the search button like this, but this is a short list. We see everything in here, so we are good. All right, what's our next job? Next job is going to be name and pseudonyms of the artist. So actually, let's make this smaller. We're probably just going to look at everything most of the time anyways. People can scroll. Okay, so another slicer for name of the artist and their pseudonym. Let's do a little bit of layout here. So we're just going to drag name and pseudonym. We could drag it in here. We can drag it in here. It doesn't quite matter. Let's make this wider. You know what? I'm going to put it up here. This is never going to be wider than this. I'm going to put it up here, put it very wide. Maybe, okay, I'm going to add a search. You definitely want to search in this one because nobody's going to scroll through all of that. And I'm going to drop it down a bit. Okay, so a bit of formatting. We're going to take off the slicer header, give it a proper title. Make sure that our visual settings are not annoying, so take off the control. Let's add the select all option. And same thing here. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Now, I'm just going to copy this and paste it, and let's try to get an interesting graph out of it. So it's going to take this matrix, and we're going to look at it. Well, there you go. That's already a thing, right? So it's looking at the funding per time period. Now, obviously, this is not sorted properly. So we should sort it by ascending time period. And what are we looking at here? This should probably be the type of, yeah, let's do that, right? So it's pretty much ignoring all of that. Oops. Funding period is my X. Yeah, that makes sense. Sum of funding is my Y. And we got the recipient type. So it's pretty simple. Now it's just a matter of getting rid of all of these titles. So funding per year per type. Do we want to place the legend maybe at the bottom center? Okay. And we're just going to do this. And speaking of this funding, let's go into the data view here. We'll look at a funding amount and we're going to say, hey, you know what? You are $1. Specifically, your Canadian dollar. Is that even going to be an option? I don't see it. I'm just going to go lazy English Canadian dollar. And now we should have some dollar signs. Billions, there you go. We just added dollars everywhere. Let's give this one a better title too. Okay, and really at this point, it's just a matter of user interface, right? So let's duplicate this. And here we'll go location. So if we do by location, it's just a matter of prioritizing location. So see how I switched? Now the location is at the top, and we can see the same data when we drill down. We could also kind of remove this recipient type and go right to the names. Let's try something. Actually, we're going to put recipient type as one of the new values and see what that does. So recipient type is no longer a row. It is now a value. That's not very friendly because we're doing all of the year stuff. Okay, so let's just take out recipient type. And we will leave it as one of the filters. So you can see all the money that went to the locations. If you really want to bring back recipient type, you may want to put it down here, so that way you can filter, or just get rid of it if you don't need it. So let's look at our new summary. Looking at just per region, we see the heading over here. So we've got that data, and really, like I said, at this point, it just becomes a matter of formatting. So let's just duplicate this so we don't mess up our work. And maybe we start making these more small, right? So we'll do drop downs instead of these giant lists. And we're going to start saving some space up there. So here I could put it by province. I could put in type of support. I'm probably going to put in the program sections. And here there's a lot of data, so we'll want to spread this up. And, we don't really see all of this, right? So it kind of becomes a real estate problem in terms of how much space you need to look at the data. Let's try something else with the legend. Maybe we can put it on the center right. Already that helps, but once again, it is taking a fair amount of space to be able to read all of this, right? So you may even want to rename some of this, or if you hover on top of it, you'll be able to see it. But already this is kind of useful. It's going to give us a picker for the types of programs that we care about. And so it's serving a dual purpose, right? I can click and dance, for example, see if it has any kind of correlation. And notice if I click in dance, if I click, creating here, it's going to keep all the years. If I click in explore, it's keeping all of the years. But if I click in this particular year, it's going to only filter by those years. So I can go in here and look at the data that way. Okay, so let's duplicate this again. And what we're going to do is just say, hey, for this view, for this page, I'm going to put a filter that we're only going to be looking at groups, or actually we're only going to be looking at individuals. So first off, the data is changing. Now this data was only looking per type. Maybe we don't really need a legend in this case because we're only looking at one type. We also don't need to say that it is per type. We can say per individual. And let's go in here and we're going to remove the province and just look at who is getting the most money. So it's Marielle Marshall that got almost, $500,000 in 1 year. And then this person that got 600,000 over 3 years, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we've simplified this table. Let's try maybe, what should we add in here? Maybe the program section would be useful to know. Yeah, let's do it by program section before we go into the names, right? So we'll be able to see how much money went into the explore and create. I'm actually quite curious about the digital strategy fund that seems to have gotten a lot of funding in 2020 and then completely crashed. So when we click on it, we can see the little bump in here, what percentage of the program it was, and see who got this money. So here's Marielle Marshall again at the top of the list, lots of digital strategy fund. And then we see, it just keeps going down like that. So what happens if we switch the values around, right? We're going to see the total. And then when we do a drill down, we're going to see, okay, well, this person got funding from multiple different locations. And let's make that thinner here. And so this person here got almost $600,000 from many different types of grants. And so obviously, 2020 was a sweet year for them and so forth. So I hope this kind of gave you a good overview of bringing in this data and how we can manipulate it, right? Like Power BI is much more powerful than Excel. It may seem a little bit crazy at first, a bit daunting, but using these techniques, we can really look at the data in any way we want. And it becomes a tyranny of the choices, if you will, whereas you want to see everything, you need kind of like 10 screens to see all of the data and chop through it. And it really comes down to how do you eat an elephant, right? So you cut it up into tiny pieces, you get your fryer going, you get your air fryer going, you get your solar cooker going, and you make sure you get lots of spices and colors and chop up that elephant and go nom 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 and just start chomping through it, making sure you deep fry the skin and analyze it and start with the tastiest bits first, what really matters to you. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of how to do your own reports with this data, and that you're not confined to letting others do the data work for you. This is free. Fairly easy to learn, so you can take my reports and change them to your own needs. And I hope this opens the door for a lot of arts folk to get into big data. And you can even do your budget with this, or you can look at whatever open source of data and use your brain and be very powerful with this. And I hope this kind of jump started your education, because we're not talking about finances necessarily. We're not talking about inventory. We're just talking about arts funding, a very precise use case. So I hope this was helpful for you, and I wish you a great day. Cheers.